What's up, folks? I'm Odd, by the way, and welcome to a kind of drawfee-coded art experiment. I doubt it's any surprise that I am regularly inspired by them. I watch them a lot when I draw. But today I figured that we would come back around to a palette challenge of a little bit of a different caliber. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to use this website, Coolers, to roll a random palette that we will then use alongside the opposites on the color wheel to it. If you don't know, complementary colors on either side of the color wheel across from each other, and I'll show you that a little bit more once we actually have what we need for this. And I want to use those kind of dueling color palettes to create two characters that are supposed to be rivals in their story, and create a story surrounding them, obviously, as I like to do with certain characters. And more likely than not, they will also be extremely shippable. Probably quite so, because that's just how that turns out. They're gonna be married in my head already. But that is the nature of this kind of thing. It's just that we have to take our time getting there, because they also at least pretend to hate each other. So at that, let's just roll our color palette and see what we have to work with here. Boop. Woo! Oh, this is so cool! Wait, hold on. This is very, like, I want to say like 70s, 60s, 70s? Peach yellow, sandy brown, burnt orange, dark purple, and tea green. Interesting. Okay, so I will pop these into Clip. Because it gives you their hex codes. Ooh, excellent. Alright, so as you can see here, we have our palette that we have selected. I said very 70s. And so now I need to try and find a better way. I wonder if I could actually go ahead and invert this. Duplicate you. Reverse gradient? I think that's right. That looks like the exact opposite. So yeah, if you were to take this one, you see where it is on the color wheel over here, and select this one, and it's completely, yeah, completely across from it. Okay, excellent. So, I mean, obviously, as this is a very warm palette, this is a very cool palette. And I might even take each of these and kind of incorporate the other a little bit in one of them to kind of connect them even further. Because, yeah, and to kind of further go into the concept of it, if you haven't noticed in media a lot of the time, characters who are supposed to be opposite, or even characters that are supposed to be together, often have opposite color palettes. I've done it myself as well, to some degree. Their motifs are very similar. The idea being that they foil and complement each other. So, off the top of my head, it happens a lot in anime. You have like Naruto and Sasuke from Naruto. Naruto is orange and yellow and bright, and Sasuke is blue and dark and all that type of stuff, but they have connecting motives and colors that kind of bring them together as rivals. So on and so forth. You know, you've got your ace attorneys, you've got any gay ship above the horizon, basically, as well. And, you know, that's just kind of the thing, is that they complement each other and they foil each other, so they also act as really great chemistry. So, I'm curious to see if I can make two characters that will encapsulate that. But at that, I think that I'm going to bring this over to Speedpaint VoiceOver, and I will show you what I have come up with for these characters when we get there. So, see you there. So I forgot to account for the fact that inverting also reverses the values of a color, value being the perceived lightness or darkness. I considered going back to try out the complementary colors in the same value, and I did, and while it looked cool, it wasn't popping quite as well, and it makes sense to also have characters who embody more true opposites have the light and the dark also swapped in their color schemes, at least to me. Let me know if you would rather see a bit more of a true quote-unquote version of this in the future, where I just go across the color wheel and don't invert the palette. I just didn't wind up trying that today. I had been doing this where I would make the color sketches on camera, like kind of live, but I'm glad I decided against that this time and gave myself a little bit more time. Just deciding the concepts here alone took me well over an hour. You'd think that these color palette challenges would be the more simple ones out of my usual lot. Initially I did too, because the colors were provided, and that is sometimes one of the hardest things to figure out. but finding a very pleasing way to put them together, especially limited like this, can be very time consuming. It's almost my character design process in reverse. Usually I work out their personality and the shapes and then color, but this kind of requires the opposite. I did wind up using the lasso fill tool this time around, and it was a lot of fun to play with and get some funky shapes out of. I know some people use it to make whole drawings, and I think I kind of get it now. I might try that myself at some point. As I mentioned to start, the original color palette gave me 70s vibes, so I thought it would be fun to fiddle around with a character who has an interest in just that. Initially, I fiddled around with a red head, and then I switched it up and wound up liking the approach with darker colors as the skin and hair color instead. I started coming up with an idea of a character who was into that vintage style with a focus on disco, and that's when the second character finally came to mind. I spent a little less time designing her because I had a much more clear vision in my head at this point. The closest color to any sort of skin tone wound up being that lightest blue, which still looks unnatural to me, but I tried my best to make it work. I decided to go for more of a punk vibe with this character. Since punk was also popularized around the 70s and the sort of punk and or rock scene was at ends socially with the disco craze, I thought that this would make a perfect foil for the first character. Left to right, I decided to name these two Vivian and Jane. I decided to go for a more stylized approach, more so than usual, for me at least, to sort of make sense of Jane's very cool tone design especially. I also did allow myself a little bit of mixing for some in-between colors and shading. My approach this time was mainly just making sure that the main color scheme wasn't overtaken by anything, so no mixing colors for the core design, just for details. I also added some little hints of color from each character's contrasting palette to tie them both together just a little bit more, and I think that it really turned out quite cute. Vivian and Jane work at a vintage store that offers both clothes and old records. Viv is more into disco and the late hippie scene of the 70s, and Jane is more into the punk scene and alternative fashion. Upon first impression, they genuinely disliked each other. Vivian found Jane cold and dour, and Jane found Vivian preppy and annoying. Their boss encouraged their little feuds, directing customers to their specialties in the store, though over time, mostly by sheer accident outside of work, they learned that there may be more similarities between them than there are differences. Viv is also into more modern alternative music, and some experimental dance stuff that Jane likes, along with having a sharp tongue when the situation calls for it, and Jane is more sweet than she initially comes across, not just espousing punk for the music, but for the radically accepting lifestyle it can have as well. They still banter and argue, although more teasingly, as they work, but overall they've settled into more of a rivalry and tentative friendship over time, even outside of work. But those are my characters for this week's challenge. I do hope that you like this little experiment. Please leave a like if you did like it, that would be much appreciated. If I'd been working less strictly with the palette here, I might have made Jin's skin tone a little bit more natural looking. Or maybe I should have just swapped in like a lighter yellow from the other palette, but I just don't know if that'd be too overwhelming and then the teal wouldn't have anywhere to be. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments and subscribe to catch any other fun art challenges that I do in the future. At that though, I'll leave this here and I'll see y'all next time.